Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly break down how Solskjaer won the tactical battle against Guardiola, ultimately knocking Manchester City out of the Premier League title race. But before we do that, don't forget to give our video a thumbs up if you do enjoy it. The bell below does give you daily notifications regarding our organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So now, when we do look at the board, it's Manchester City, and again, what looked to be more of a 4-2-3-1 against Manchester United's 4-2-3-1. So when we really break it down and we assess it, we have to look at how City wanted to approach the game and how United did look to go about things without the ball, because both were integral to United's success. We knew United would sit off here, drop off a bit deeper, look to play on the counterattack. They've done that in the bigger games this season, where they've been more reactive, look to neutralize their opponent's strengths, and then utilize their speed to break on the counterattack. And we saw that here within their starting 11. You have 4 speedy attackers in Martial, Rashford, Lingard, and Daniel James breaking forward. And then you have 6 that sit back. The fullbacks don't push forward, and you have Fred and McTominay breaking up play in the center of the pitch to ensure that City can't penetrate through those areas. So when we really do assess it, we have Gabriel Jesus ahead of the center backs, looking to occupy that zone, not really offering much in terms of link-up play in comparison to what he did against Burnley, and that was a big issue for City, because when you look out to the wider areas, both Manchester City players are looking to come inside, and they really lacked natural width in those zones. Because what ended up happening here was that Kyle Walker was a bit narrow, often shifting. Sometimes it looked like it was more of a back three when they did have possession, not looking to bomb forward, possibly because Pep was wary of the threat that United can pose on the counterattack, which does make you think, why not throw in Gundogan there, move to a 4-2-3-1, a natural 4-2-3-1, and possibly play De Bruyne in behind Gabriel Jesus, but that wasn't the case here. So we did have Walker a bit narrow, not really looking to push high, and Bernardo Silva was on the flank, looking to cut in when he received the ball, and that would often prompt potential runs for Kevin De Bruyne. We've seen that combination on several occasions this season. It's their best combination in terms of overall link-up play. However, here United did a good job for the most part dealing with that threat when it did come about, and that was very rare. They'd have Fred coming across to deal with that threat. Sometimes we saw Harry Maguire come across to try and deal with that threat, but they were never placed in a position where Kevin De Bruyne had a free cross into that right channel. So that's the best that United could hope for there. So that's how they went about their business on the right-hand side, with Bernardo looking to cut in from the right, possibly looking to get De Bruyne to make runs in behind Luke Shaw. And on the left-hand side, we had Angelino, who could obviously hold the width on the left touchline. And on a few occasions, we did see him higher than a narrow Daniel James, who would have to retreat back into that space. And that was when Raheem Sterling was narrow ahead of Wan-Bissaka. But for the most part, we saw Angelino narrow ahead of Daniel James, and that created space for Sterling to receive the ball on the wide touchline to run at Wan-Bissaka. For the most part, Wan-Bissaka did very well. He did get beat on a few occasions that did lead to chances, but City were never able to test De Gea in those zones. Wider players are looking to cut in. You're not really getting any width from the fullbacks or from any wider players besides De Bruyne, who could drop into space in behind Rashford, based off the fact that when Walker was in that narrow conservative position, Rashford stayed higher up the pitch. And that was possibly based on the fact that if United could win the ball, they took the gamble and tried to get him into those zones. Because when you look at it, if Bernardo Silva's cutting in, you have Fred, who should be dealing with De Bruyne. So they don't really need Rashford to be that high. But the big issue there was that if De Bruyne could drop into that space to get on the ball, and that never really was the case. So when you look at that, you have to look at the central midfield. Silva often looking to get into space to the right of McTominay. Sometimes you'd push a bit higher and Lindelof would be stuck on him, not really having the impact that you expect from David Silva, struggled to really get involved in the game. And then you look at Kevin De Bruyne, often looking to drop off into that space as well. He was more so ahead of of Fred and not really to the right of him and not really getting the best out of Luke Shaw. So those two struggled for the most part in terms of their overall dominance that we've seen through past seasons. And that really leaves you with Rodri, who was often picked out of the game by Lingard. So when you really look at that, you're questioning how City are able to create chances. And a lot of that's down to United's work rate in the center of the pitch and in wider areas. Yes, they did make some gambles, but City struggled to create chances. So when you look at United and assess how they went about their business, they dropped off more into two banks of four, what should have been two banks of four, but it was very lopsided because what happens here is that you often saw Martial, if he was pressing Fernandinho, trying to ensure that he can't get passes into the City midfield. Stones was often the spare man, which kind of is an indictment of where he's at in his career. And you'd have Rashford near Walker. Walker was very conservative, like I said, so that wasn't a big issue for Rashford. And there was always a threat that Rashford could break him behind. And it seemed like Walker was wary of that, given the fact that Rashford did do a very good job against Serge Aurier and Sissoko down that flank in midweek. So that's how they went about their business up front. Lingard was supposed to be stuck on Rodri, and that was pivotal there. In the wider areas, you have Daniel James dealing with Angelino, and then in midfield, Fred and McTominay were doing a pretty decent job in stifling Silva and Kevin De Bruyne's threat in midfield. So when you really look at that and you see how both sides are shaped, you have to question where United were able to find their openings. And for that opening half hour or so, they were the better side because they were able to find gaps in City's midfield and in behind their defense. But it also has to do with the way that City did look to deal with the game without the ball. And that was them dropping off into more of two banks of four as well. And they had big problems because their shape was poor and their pressing was lazy, lethargic, and they weren't getting out to their markers in time. When you really look at it, it's just simple closing down, and it was basically the same system as United. So it shouldn't have been hard as to how you were going to go about it, because you had Jesus, who should have been stepping out to Lindelof, or frankly, both center backs. Silva should have been out closer to McTominay, but the biggest problem that they had there is that when you have the wider players in Sterling and Bernardo Silva closing out the fullbacks, now you have Rodri and you have Kevin De Bruyne. What we often saw was that Rodri should be picking up Lingard and De Bruyne should be picking up Fred. De Bruyne wasn't picking up Fred, and Fred was often deeper with time on the ball, and that was a big issue. The other issue that they had there was perhaps the reason why De Bruyne wasn't picking up Fred. It was based off the fact that Martial was dropping off ahead of Rodri to look to get on the ball, and Rodri would step to him, and then you have De Bruyne not marking anyone, and the big gap that was being formed was the fact that you had Lingard free to the right of De Bruyne, and you had Fred ahead of him. You can't have Bernardo Silva shift over, and if he does shift over, that does create space for Luke Shaw, but we only really saw Luke Shaw push forward on the overlap on a handful of occasions. He wasn't looking to break forward based off the threat that City do possess on the counterattack and down that right-hand side in general. But if Bernardo shifts out there and De Bruyne shifts into the path of Lingard, then City are okay. But often we never got either of those players closing down markers, and that was a big thing, because once Martial drops off and Rodri steps to him, if Silva does attempt to get to McTominay, at the bare minimum, you still have two of those players taken out of the game. But with Bernardo caught in between Shaw and De Bruyne not picking up anyone, you have gaps to play out of the press. With Walker in a narrow position, who possibly would step out to Lingard, you have space for Rashford to break in. And that was one of the biggest issues that Manchester City encountered against United, and it's been a reoccurring theme throughout this season. So when we break down and assess the way that Manchester United were able to create chances, the first example does highlight how quickly they're able to break in transition. We have Kyle Walker on the ball, and he slides the ball across Rashford for De Bruyne making a run across Fred. We have De Bruyne being able to spin Fred, and he looks to play a pass into David Silva breaking towards the box, but Lindelof does well to get across. Lindelof then plays the ball into Lingard, who's able to spin away from Rodri and skip by Walker to slide the ball ball out to Marcus Rashford in that left channel. Walker does recover, but what Rashford locates is Martial darting in between the center backs to drag out Fernandinho. So the pass is played and Martial is held up by Fernandinho in that left channel. But when he looks up, he sees Rodri recovering and De Bruyne recovering, and he splits both of them to pull the ball back into the path of Fred, who is breaking free towards goal. John Stones doesn't step, David Silva doesn't recover, and we end up seeing Fred slide the ball out to Daniel James in right half space ahead of Angelino, and he forces Ederson into a save. That was less than 60 seconds into the game, and we already have Manchester United breaking swiftly into City's half, and they possibly should have scored. Shortly after that, we witnessed another great example of how poor City were in terms of their pressing. We have De Gea drop the ball off into the path of Lindelof, and no one steps to Lindelof, which should be Gabriel Jesus, and McTominay drops off, and those two combine quickly. By the time Lindelof gets the ball back, we finally have Sterling near Wan-Bissaka, Jesus looking to close in on Lindelof, and Silva looking to step towards McTominay. What ends up happening there is that Lindelof ends up splitting Silva and Sterling, and McTominay ends up spinning across Silva to bypass him. At that moment, what we end up seeing is Martial dropping off ahead of Rodri to pull him out of position, and Kevin De Bruyne in midfield, but not picking up anyone. He should be picking up Fred. Fred is unmarked. The only thing that they really can do there is if Bernardo Silva shifts towards Fred and gives up space for Luke Shaw to break forward. And that's a gamble that they possibly could have taken because Wan-Bissaka and Luke Shaw never really looked like they were going to push forward. However, Bernardo never really pinched into Fred, and now you have Fred and you have Jesse Lingard dropping off with Kevin De Bruyne not picking up anyone. We have Silva out of position, and we also have Rodri picking up Martial. So what ends up happening there is that we see McTominay slide the ball out to Lingard, and he breaks forward before sliding the ball out into the path of Marcus Rashford, who is now able to run at Kyle Walker on the break, and we end up seeing Bernardo Silva looking to recover. And when Rashford looks to cut in, Lingard continues his run in between the center backs to receive the ball from Rashford that he pokes in between Walker and Stones, and Lingard picks it up in left half space and forces Ederson into a save, and frankly there, United should have went up 1-0. When we look to the build up to the penalty that United were awarded, you have to question City's shape going forward. We have Walker finally looking to step forward and join the attack, and we have Kevin De Bruyne ahead of Luke Shaw. What we end up seeing there is that with Lingard shifting over to the left-hand side with Rashford much higher, Walker steps forward and he ends up bypassing Fred and McTominay to find Gabriel Jesus dropping off of the center backs. However, Jesus' touch is poor and he ends up losing a 50-50 challenge with Fred, who is then able to win a challenge with Walker. What Fred ends up doing now is that he slides the ball out into the path of Lingard, who does pick up the ball to the right of Rodri, and what that leaves him with is that Bernardo Silva is behind him. There's no Kyle Walker there, and with De Bruyne in the position that he's in, it's a big gap down that left-hand side, and we end up seeing Lingard slide the ball out to Rashford, free to run at John Stones. We do see Bernardo Silva running back to try and recover, and what ends up happening there is that we see Rashford cut in on Stones and then drag the ball back in towards the box before Bernardo Silva does clip him down. When you break down that whole sequence, you have De Bruyne out of position, Walker pushing forward. You have David Silva high on the left-hand side with so much space for Rodri to cover, and once they lose the ball, they're in a big danger because it's quickly facilitated to Lingard, and Rashford was high, and that is a structural issue that Guardiola had to fix, and it was constantly happening throughout the pitch. When you break down all those chances, it's clear that City were having issues, both structurally and the manner in which they were looking to press. Guardiola got it wrong, and United were constantly able to bypass their midfield and frankly should have been up more goals. Martial did double their lead with a near post effort, but now we had to look at how City were creating chances or attempting to create chances, because down 2-0 at home with perhaps their title defense on the line, we expected more. So when we look to City's chances, they did get into good areas in the manner in which Guardiola wanted them to attack United. The problem was was they weren't doing it consistently, combined with the fact that they were being hit on the counterattack at every opportunity. The next example that we do look at highlights the combination between Bernardo Silva and Kevin De Bruyne, and this was one of the rare opportunities where they were able to get into a good position with Silva helping them out, but just not being able to finish it off. The ball is shifted out to Bernardo Silva ahead of Luke Shaw, and he's already looking to cut inside on Luke Shaw, and he ends up playing a reverse ball in behind the United left back for De Bruyne running off Fred into that channel. De Bruyne does pick up the ball, but he is met by Maguire in that space. So Maguire closes him down. De Bruyne ends up dropping the ball off to Bernardo ahead of Shaw, and what Bernardo ends up doing is that he ends up squaring the ball into David Silva unmarked at the edge, and he continues his run off Shaw, and Silva instantly dinks the ball over Fred and Shaw for Bernardo in that right half space, and Bernardo pulls the ball back into the path of Gabriel Jesus, but Lindelof makes an exceptional last-ditch tackle. Two instances where City get into good positions, but United's defense does the job barely, but it's enough. Shortly after that, we see various manners in which City could utilize their width, and it was pivotal to them possibly creating their best chance of that first half. We have Rodri ahead of Lingard, switching the ball to a narrow Angelino ahead of Daniel James, and he slides the ball out to Raheem Sterling. What happened here with Raheem Sterling is that when he looked to cut in, he struggled against Wan-Bissaka, but here once again he runs on the outside of Wan-Bissaka and he delivers a cross into the box that is cleared by Luke Shaw, but Shaw nods it into the path of Rodri, who slides it out to De Bruyne in that right space that was being free because Rashford was a bit too high. De Bruyne then locates Gabriel Jesus, making a run in between the center backs and delivers a superb cross into the box for the Brazilian, but he flashes his header wide. A player in that position playing for Manchester City needs to, at the bare minimum, direct that header on goal, and that was a wasted opportunity for City there. So when we look to one final example of how City were able to get into good areas in that first half, again it stemmed down the right-hand side. It was Walker in a narrow position in United's half, sliding the ball out to Bernardo Silva, and Bernardo Silva is able to cut in on Shaw and again play a reverse ball across him, and a De Bruyne runs off Fred's shoulder into right half space. It forces Maguire across, and with Gabriel Jesus making a run across Lindelof, that leaves space for Silva to run off the back post because he was positioning himself ahead of Lindelof. So when De Bruyne gets that lofted cross to the far post, it does meet Silva, but he's unable to direct the cross on goal. So when you look to the second half, there wasn't really much to talk about. When we do assess it, we did have Otamendi come on for John Stones, and frankly, Rodri was involved in two of the better moments prior to the final 15 minutes of the game. We had Daniel James dispossess Angelino and break forward, but Rodri made a vital intervention to ensure that United couldn't test Ederson once again. And then we saw Angelino press James and win the ball in United's half to break forward, and that eventually led to Rodri forcing De Gea into a save from the edge of the box. So when you really look at it, the changes were pivotal here, but they also didn't really impact the overall tempo of the game. There was one slight alteration in that second half, and it did see De Bruyne move out to that right-hand side on the rare occasion ahead of Luke Shaw, and City looked much better in those situations where he was able to poke the ball in behind Shaw for Sterling or Bernardo Silva, but those City players were unable to create a chance from that wide right half space zone. There were more changes. We ended up seeing Riyad Mahrez come on for Bernardo, and that offers somewhat of the same threat, except for the fact that Mahrez is the more renowned goal scorer. You're not going to have Mahrez drive to the byline. He's going to cut in, and Luke Shaw's job never really changed, and he did a good job at left back. And we also saw Pereira come on for Martial, which pushed Rashford a bit higher, and what we ended up seeing there was that now they want a more defensive cover down that left-sided zone, and as United dropped off a bit deeper, they did lack a counter-attacking threat. What should be said though is that City were still struggling in the same avenues, and United didn't crumble under pressure. Otamendi did make a game of it by scoring off a Mahrez corner kick where he was able to tower over his markers in Wan-Bissaka to push the deficit to one goal, and City had one great chance shortly after that, but David De Gea makes a quality save. We do see Tuanzebe come on and Ashley Young. United move more to a 5-4-1 to close out the game, and they finish it off with a deserved 3 points. When you break down the game as a whole, Solskjaer's United deserve credit because once again, they claim all 3 points in the big game. They know how to defend as a unit. They stayed compact in those central areas, and they had a legitimate plan towards goal. Yes, we've seen it in these big games where they rely on the speed of their front four to make the difference, and once again, it was successful. Why? Well, that's where City get blamed. We knew that their attack was going to be limited, and it has been limited throughout the season based off injuries. In terms of the variety, they're going to cut in. De Bruyne's width is key. Here, they really lacked the width. Sterling going around Wan-Bissaka was pivotal. De Bruyne and Bernardo's combination was also good, and De Bruyne getting deeper crosses in those zones could also have made a difference, but we didn't see enough of it. And the biggest problem that they had, and it's was integral to them winning City League titles throughout Guardiola's last 2 seasons, was the manner in which they pressed and worked hard to retain possession. We didn't see that here. Their pressing was disjointed, it was lazy, and United were able to bypass them, and their midfield shape crumbled at every opportunity. And with Martial dropping a bit deeper to overload that center of the area, there was no one picking up Fred and there was no one picking up Lingard, and United eventually made them pay. But let me know what you guys think. 2 great wins by Manchester United. Has Solskjaer got it right? Can they finish in the top 4? And what about Manchester City? 14 points behind Liverpool. Is their title race over? Do they have any chance of winning any silverware this season? Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And don't forget, if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.